Hello, and welcome to another episode of the B2B Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Nils Vinje, and today my guest is Sara Barnes. Sara, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Nils. I'm very excited to be here. It was great being on the podcast, over a year ago, I guess, at this point, and great to be back. So thanks for having me.
It was, yeah, you were on episode number 4. In the very early days, we talked a lot about your rise through the ranks from individual contributor to vice president, the lessons learned, and just had an incredible view into the up and to the right trajectory that your career took, and talked a little bit about what it was like to work together with you as a coaching client, which has been absolutely fantastic. And I'm thrilled for our topic today, which is all about inspiring your team, because you're now VP of Customer Success at Verifiable and have just entered a new organization. So inspiring your team is kind of an important topic, right?
Very important topic. And it's been great to be able to apply your playbook for leadership at a new company. So I'm excited to dig into the things that we do to inspire our teams.
I love it. All right, cool. Well, let's get right to it, because this is full of some crispy, tactical, specific things that our listeners can take away and implement. And if you're doing these already, awesome. This is going to be reinforcement that you are doing the right things. If you're not doing them yet, well, here's some ideas on things that you can do. And Sara, hit us with your first point.
Yeah. So my first one is empowering your employees. And there are a lot of different things that you can do to empower employees. I'll share a couple of things that I do to empower my new team. And I did this with my last team with a lot of success. Every employee has a voice and different ideas, and all of those ideas matter. And as we bring those together, they help us strengthen our team and our processes and be more successful in what we do. And one of the things that I do to particularly empower new hires, I think oftentimes when new hires join companies, they can be afraid to speak up. They feel like they're taking a lot from the team because they're trying to gather all of that new knowledge and get up to speed as quickly as possible to help. But one of the things that I do is the first conversation I have with new employees, I tell them, hey, you are a huge asset to the team, and I want to know what you think about what you're seeing. So be critical, look at the processes we have, see, based on my last experience, this is something that I did that worked really well, and be bullish about sharing, hey, this is something we might want to test out here. It seems so simple. It's just a quick conversation, but I ask them, hey, in our first one-on-one, I want to hear 3 observations that you have on things that maybe we're not doing that we should consider doing, or things that you see that are working really well. But it really helps to empower the employee and make them feel like I'm contributing to the team from the start. My manager cares about my opinion, and we're creating a culture of collaboration and feedback and empowering employees. It makes them a part of the team so quickly when you do that during that kind of new hire process. Another thing that I often do is identifying the team's superpowers. We all have different superpowers, and we might see one employee is really good at one thing, but I'm good at something else. And sometimes certain superpowers are highlighted much more than others. And taking the time to really reflect, everyone has those superpowers, and how do we make sure that we're bolstering those? It just gives employees so much confidence, and it really prompts so much more engagement in just how they're interacting with the team and really doing their jobs.
That's great. I do love that point, because the time at which an employee joins an organization or your team is one of the most important, but it's also one of the ones that's filled with like the most uncertainty and usually fear. I remember what it was like joining some teams, and I was terrified of saying anything because I didn't know the context. I didn't know how long that had been the case. I didn't know any of the things that I might have fear that if I spoke up and said, hey, this isn't really efficient, somebody would say, well, that's because of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, which you couldn't possibly know. And then you feel not so great because you obviously didn't know that. So I like how you just kind of push all that to the side and say, you know what, your opinion is actually more valuable, because you don't have any of the baggage of having been here and seen some of the things and have some of the assumptions that we do just because we do this work every day. So I think bringing that to the surface is really important.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can see people light up because they're like, oh, you want to hear what I have to say about this. And they just engage so much more with the team. So it's a pretty good little thing that you can do to really kind of drive that inspiration within the team.
Yeah, and one other piece that I love to do is if there's, some form of structured onboarding, hopefully, that the team members going through, not every organization has it or has it dialed in perfectly, I know that, but there's some process to follow. Well, one of the things I love to do with new employees is have them be responsible for the improvement of that process for the next person who goes through it. So it's no longer the responsibility of the people running the program, it's the responsibility of the person going through it to improve it, because they're the absolute best person to identify the holes and the gaps and where the opportunities are, because they're going to have questions that aren't answered. And if they find an answer, they need to update whatever the flow is, whatever the process is, and figure out how to get it better for the next person.
I am a huge advocate of that process. I can tell you, I started at Verifiable 3 months ago. We have a fully built out onboarding plan because of that. We had zero onboarding when I started. So you can do it quickly. It doesn't take that long. And these little things, it has a big impact on your team, but also setting you up for success in the future. So that, I love that call out.
Wonderful. All right, cool. So my first point on this is to take the long-term view, but balance the long-term view with the immediate needs of what's going on today. So in all things, regardless of company size, stage, industry, product, whatever, everything is, we should be thinking from a long-term perspective. And it's really important, especially when we're talking leadership and we're talking inspiring your team, to paint a vision of where you're going. If the company has a great vision, cool, you can align to that. But it's also really important to just think long-term about your employees and their role and the role of this team and the opportunities that will be there in the future, but not at the expense of ignoring what's happening today. Because if you only exist and only focus on the future, you're going to get kind of left to the side by your team saying, well, Nils is always off in la la land. Well, we'll see when that happens. And the reality is, no, you got to paint that and think that way and drop pieces of that as you go, but focus on the immediate things that have to happen today. So there's a balance to strike there. Curious for your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's challenging. I've definitely had moments where I've gotten too sucked into the day-to-day or too sucked into the long term. And one thing that I found that's helpful is to put structure around it. Even reminders on my calendar, check in with the team on this. Every third one-on-one, we're going to be talking about some, career related goal that the employee has set. How's that going? But I have found that it's really easy to kind of teeter one way or the other, but that balance is really, really important to keeping your team feeling inspired. I think oftentimes too, we can forget about the longer term. What are we working so hard towards? And one thing that I like to do is we do monthly all hands meetings with the whole CS organization. And I always start with what is our company mission and what is our team mission? Why do we do what we do? And how does the work that we do in our team actually contribute to the vision and mission that we're driving forward with the company? And I think that's so important because employees have the same struggle. They can get super stuck in the day-to-day and forget, why am I working so hard? So it's important that we're reinforcing that. But I think doing it in a way, I need reminders. So I just add it to my calendar and I know, okay, this week my one-on-ones are going to focus on this. And I think it ensures that I don't miss that. And I'm not at the end of the quarter thinking, wait, have we even talked about any of this? And it's been 3 months or even longer than that.
It's the contrast that makes life interesting, right? If everything was always the same, we'd all be bored out of our minds. But when we look at long-term, then short-term, long-term, then short-term, long-term, then short-term, positive, negative, that contrast is what keeps people engaged. And it's our job as leaders to provide that contrast and facilitate that contrast to keep everybody inspired and not focused on just, what's right in front of them for the entire time. So awesome. Okay, let's go on to your second idea around this.
Yeah, my second one is to foster a culture of innovation. So when I joined my most recent company, there is a lot of building and a lot of stuff for us to figure out. And one of the things that I really reinforced with my team is let's try and fail quickly. I wanted the team to feel, hey, we need to innovate. We need to figure out what's going to work, what's not going to work, but let's do it quickly. And I had an employee who came to me. We were trying to figure out how to drive efficiency in our implementation process. And I had an employee who came to me. We had come up with an idea, tested it out for a week, and found at the end of the week, it actually did the opposite of what we wanted. And they were feeling a little bit discouraged about it. And my response was, let's celebrate this because we found something that didn't work and we realized it within 5 business days instead of within 3 months. And our idea from there was, okay, what can we test out next week? And maybe that'll be the right thing, or maybe that's another thing that we realize isn't working. But those are 2 things that we've identified that are not the solution, and we figured them out quickly. And I think fostering an environment where employees feel like they can innovate, they can test out different ideas, they feel empowered to failing is not a bad thing as long as we do it quickly and we learn from that. It really helps to make employees feel like I can really have an impact here. And most employees are excited to try new things and experiment. We all get to a point where it's like, I've been doing the same thing for a while, and you just kind of go through same thing, different day. And I think the innovation piece is really important. And it doesn't have to be some huge innovative thing, but if you see, hey, something's breaking down in this part of the customer journey or whatever your job role is, and digging into that and experimenting with what are little shifts that we can possibly experiment with to see if it makes the change that we need, that usually energizes people because it kind of breathes life into the day-to-day stuff that we're doing. But it's important as a leader that I create an environment where employees feel comfortable doing those things, where they feel comfortable collaborating with me on those things, because it can definitely go in the opposite direction. But I think just creating that culture of innovation and experimentation is really, really important.
Yeah, and I love that you reframed the meaning of that example, right, for the employee. They were feeling a little bit down, a little bit deflated, a little bit of a failure, and you said, no, no, no. The meaning of this is actually something very positive. And it's the meaning that we associate with things that determines how we feel, and how we feel determines how we act. So if the meaning can change in an instant by you observing this and then reframing that meaning, the feelings can change and then the action changes, and it's a very, very fast cycle that can spin, which I absolutely love that you called that out. Okay, cool. My second one is build a team identity. And when I say identity here, there are really 3 key things that come down to this. You and I have discussed this. You've implemented this inside of your teams. And those are, 1, a very clear purpose statement, right? Just a simple answer to the question, the purpose of this team, whatever size or magnitude it is blank. The purpose of this team is blank, right? And then a set of 3 core values. And these really represent kind of the operating principles of what it means to be part of this team. And finally, a team brand, something that is usually a lot of fun that the team can rally behind. And this team identity is, over the years, as I've built these with the teams I've run, and I've coached people and helped them build teams, and I've done this as a consultant to help companies build teams, has been exceptional in the results because it creates this identity that everyone is part of. And so instead of it being Sarah's team or Nils's team, all of a sudden now we are part of this, whatever the team name is, and that is bigger than any one individual person. And anytime we're doing work that is aligned directly with something that is bigger than ourselves, we are going to feel a sense of contribution and a sense of obligation to live up to the standards. But the sad part is, a lot of times, and this is where the uninspiring piece of a lot of work comes from, is that the identity is never defined. We're just a team. We're random people. Show up and we are told to do work. And then you get frustrated and you leave a job and you go do the same thing someplace else. You aren't really part of anything. And it's not the company's job to do this. Some companies have great culture, some do. It is the leader's job. And no matter how big the team or how small the team, I've done this with teams as small as 3 and as big as 500. Right? And it works every single time at every single stage. So, curious for your thoughts on the identity piece.
Yeah. I love your call out about it doesn't matter the size of your team because it's the truth. I've had very small teams and much larger teams, and it is important for all of them. And I think when you're grounded in what is that vision? What are we working towards? What is the expectation that we have of ourselves and of each other? It really creates the team. Until you do that, you're just kind of operating as individual employees and probably doing a decent job. But as soon as you kind of come together and create that together, it totally shifts kind of how the team collaborates and really operates because they're operating under one vision that everyone has contributed to. So I totally agree that it's a core component. And I can tell you, even having run teams without that and then implementing that process, just learning through you, Nils, you see a visible change. And honestly, it makes conversations a lot easier because everyone is rooted in these are our core values. This is what we're operating against. And so there's not this, again, kind of unspoken expectations or misalignment. You're all creating this together. And it's really kind of creating a strong foundation for you to build upon within your team.
That's right. It is the foundation, right? It has to be there if you want to build a high-performing team, if you want to build a team that comes together like no other team you've ever worked with or for before. And just a couple examples on the size and magnitude point. So the first team I ever did this for we were a team of 4. So it was me as the manager, was the first time I got promoted into a management position, and 3 people who on Friday I was a peer sitting next to them at my desk table. And on Monday, I was their manager. And oh boy, did I want to, make sure that the focus was not on me, as it tends to be in those transition situations. So that was the very first time I did this. It was a team of 4. And I could still call up any one of those team members and we could go right back to where it was. This was over 12 years ago, right? And it's just, we had that close of a bond as a result of building this identity where we were part of this team. And I just happened to be the leader of that team. That was the fun part for me, right? And then on the other end of the spectrum, I was fortunate enough to do some work with one of the world's largest software organizations. And this leader had inherited an organization of about 400-ish people. And it was the result of 5 different companies being acquired and then having a label slapped over all of them. And then basically she was at the helm of figuring out how to align all of these 5 different companies from a customer success perspective. And they had 5 different ways of doing things, 5 different cultures, probably a million different ways of doing things, actually. And we spent time with her and her leadership team to build the team identity, to go through these steps and everything I teach in the B2B Leaders Academy that you've been through. And we created a team identity that was incredibly strong and actually was the lightning rod of what aligned those 400 people to that one vision. And it wouldn't have been possible without that, but she recognized the importance of doing it. I got to help facilitate and make sure it happened. And then they went on and ran with that identity for years. And it was an absolute blast. So it's just so much power in that. And it's one of those things that I think oftentimes gets put in the, oh, that's nice to have, or that's kind of soft and frilly, right?
That's exactly what I was thinking of, Nils, as you're talking about this. It's like, leaders at any company, we have a lot of problems to tackle, right? Like our job, I think you shared this with me when I was newly promoted to the VP position. Your job is to address challenges and solve problems. And it's very easy for us to just get blinders on and just look at what's the next problem, but we really have to zoom out. And even though it sounds like, oh, this is one of those fluffy culture things, it's not. It's really building the foundation for your team that you operate off of. And I can totally see in this example of we're bringing a lot of different teams with a lot of different expectations and visions and understanding. Get them all rooted in the same thing that they've all played a part in, and you're headed in the same direction instead of everyone working really hard, but in different directions, which we all know how that ends.
Yeah, it's the difference between the psychology and the tactics, right? In any change effort, in anything, there are two sides. You have to address the psychology side. You cannot just address the tactics. And the vast majority of the professional world wants to go down the tactics path because it's very clear. It's very, cut and dry. It's very, here's a process, whatever. The reality is, if you don't address the psychology side and why people are going to buy into this vision, you'll never win. You'll never, ever make it. And it's so important, but so often overlooked. And that's why in everything that I teach and everything the B2B Leaders Academy is built on is the combination of psychology and tactics. And if you address both of those, it's a piece of cake. Okay, so let's talk about your third item on the list.
You set me up well for this one, Nils.
That's my job.
Yes. Fostering a collaborative environment. One of the things that I learned early on working with Nils is I don't have the answers. We have the answer. Part of my job as an effective leader is to see what resources do we have? What tools do we have in our toolkit? Employees, knowledge, experience that we can bring together to solve whatever problems are facing us. And when I think of how do I foster a collaborative environment, a lot of that is oftentimes I come to the team with a problem. Hey, here's the problem. How do we want to tackle it? Here are some ideas that I have based on my knowledge, but I'm sure we've all heard of the situation when we were ICs where employees said, my manager posed this problem and they're posing this solution, but it's never going to solve it because they don't understand what we actually do. And that is so, so common. And collaborating with your team and workshopping with your team and prompting a lot of those powerful discussions is really important. And this doesn't mean every problem that comes up, you're asking your team for the solution, but it means how do we work together as a team to make sure we have the information that we need to really drive success? And fostering that type of collaboration as a leader will get your team to start thinking that way. So instead of the team feeling like every time I run into a problem, I have to go straight to Sara, they're going to think, what knowledge do I have that can help solve this? Or is there anyone else, any of my colleagues that I can go to workshop these types of things? And I found that employees feel really inspired here because they feel like they're working to solve a problem, maybe a really big problem or a trivial problem with their team versus, Sarah's just going to tell me what to do and I'm going to march forward and that's what it is. Very few people want to work in that type of environment. So I think fostering that collaboration from the top up or from the top down is really, really important.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And there's an interesting point there that you were sharing about the fact that not everybody is going to think this way, right off the bat, right? The common notion is, well, I got promoted into this position because I knew all the stuff to get promoted into the position. And the funny thing is, and the irony is that the higher up you go, the less answers you should have, and the better you need to be at coaching and helping other people come to the conclusion themselves, whether it's a group, an individual, or whatever it is. And the other thing that you touched on there was, helping people to see the process of how to come up with solutions. It's not easy. We are not taught this. Our education system, the last thing that is taught is how to think strategically through problems. The education system is largely built around memorization and repetition. So when we get into the professional world, we work in some of these environments, like that doesn't work. There's no memorizing to do when you're facing challenges that have never been faced by your team, your customers, this organization, whatever it is. And so there's this element of resourcefulness. And one of my favorite Tony Robbins quotes is that it's more important to be resourceful than it is to have resources. And there can always be a heavy dose of, well, if we only had X, we could do it. If we only had Y, we could do it. Well, if we don't have X, then we can't do it. And that's all tying it back to resources. But the reality is, it's not the resources that are going to make you successful. It's the resourcefulness. And what you were just describing in that collaborative environment is 100% aligned with teaching people how to be resourceful. And then when it comes to them solving problems, whether it's on their own or ideas they have to bring to the team, they will bring that skill set. And that is a huge, huge value add.
Yeah, totally agree. I love that. Is a great quote to live by.
Absolutely, 100%. All right, my third one is everyone's favorite radio station. And this is WIIFM. And it stands for What's in It for Me. So there's been a lot of challenge in the first half of this year, 2023, as we're recording in, with regards to the economic environment. A lot of layoffs, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of targets missed, a lot of issues just across the board in the economy, inside companies. I mean, there is nobody who's virtually gotten a free pass, and the fascinating thing is that in the conversations that I've had with leaders and with my clients and with everybody helping them, is there's a really difficult environment to deal with. And the generation of people who are working for the leaders that I work with really haven't been through a difficult economic downturn because we've been on such a high for such a long period of time. The tech world especially, right? We've been on a roll for a lot of years. And so when you haven't seen that downturn, it's really hard to have some understanding of the perspective. So when these leaders are talking with their teams and trying to help them see the fact that it's not all roses all the time, like it was in the last 4 years, 5 years, then it's really important for them to communicate just why we're in this, but from the individual's perspective. And what I mean is, what's in it for them to go through this level of depth with the company and with their role and the challenges that they're facing in order to come out and tell a completely different story on the other side. And if the leader is able to do that, they can get people bought in and inspired, no problem. But if they don't do that, the team is usually going to just wallow in the fact that everything's falling apart and nothing is working and just be a little bit, despondent and just not feel very good. So tuning everything that you share with your team and always thinking about what's in it for me from the employee's perspective is going to help with the inspiration side, because ultimately what you think isn't really that important. What they think about what you think is far more important. And if you align your message, you're going to be in good shape.
Yeah, I love that call out. It's so important. It makes me think of what is the silver lining, right? There really is a silver lining to just about every situation. And I think as leaders, we need to be able to identify what is that, and it's going to differ across the team, right? I think of like joining really early stage startup life. I remember when I was a brand new CSM at my first startup, we were about 10 employees and it was tough. It was so challenging. And I didn't necessarily have someone there who was saying, get through this and you will learn more than you will ever learn anywhere else. But when I look back at it in retrospect, it's like, oh yeah, that was an incredible experience and I wouldn't trade it for anything. And as leaders, it's our job to identify, how is this going to benefit you? How will this help you grow and evolve and whatnot, versus doom and gloom. This is so challenging. How are we going to get over this? But we have to really make sure that we're connecting with employees and ensuring that they're staying rooted in what am I getting out of this? Because there is something that they're still getting out of it. It's just a matter of figuring out what is that piece for each of the employee based on the circumstances.
And the experience they got out of it, no matter what the situation is, good, bad, or other, is valuable, but it's only valuable if you can relate it into a way that they understand and can conceptualize. And so that's why they got to tune into the WIIFM. All right, Sarah, what's your fourth one on the list?
My fourth one, which you're on a roll, Nils, because you keep setting me up pretty well for these, but promoting continuous growth and learning. And when I was thinking of like, what are tactics that you can really use continuous growth and learning to really inspire your team? The first thing that I always do is observe the team, sit back, shadow. I had talked a little bit about identifying superpowers among the team. What are the things that they're really good at? What are the things that when they do those things, they really light up? And how do you identify additional opportunities for them to grow in those areas and prompt? We talked about having those important discussions around the short term versus long term, and really making sure that you're prompting continuous learning with your team and growth opportunities. Oftentimes, I think we think of, well, promotion, what's that next step? How do I get to that next level? And those things are all really important, and we should be having those conversations with our teams. But it's just as important to for us to observe and see what's really lighting up our employees. Like, what is making them, like, you see just this brightness and energy when they do these types of things, and have a conversation about it. I've been in a couple of situations where I've observed employees and I see them just like rocking it at something that I've never seen them do before. And we'll have a one-on-one and I'll bring up, hey, you did an incredible job at this. And their response will be, oh, I'm not good at that. And it's like, it kind of blows my mind. And when you really dig into it and say, well, this is what I observed, and here was the response from others, and this is what I saw your response was, what do you think about that? When you give yourself the chance to kind of step out of the box of your current role, how does that make you feel? And every time they're like, oh, I love doing that. Like, I feel very energized about that. And then that gives me the opportunity to identify, great, where can we harness that more in other areas of the company? And the employees start thinking more creatively around their growth and their learning opportunities. And you can see the inspiration in them because they feel I feel seen, and I'm being given opportunities that help me shine my brightest because I'm doing the things that I love and that I'm really good at.
And that is, at the core, that last piece of feeling seen, feeling heard, knowing that somebody else recognizes what it is you're naturally talented to do means more than compensation. It means more than promotion. It means more than anything. And the reality is, and every single person listening to this, and you and I included, we've all been through times in our professional life working for leaders where that was not the case, and you know how you felt, and it was not good. And you wanted to exit as quickly as possible or find somewhere else that did. Right? And the observations is so key. And what I love is that you can do this at any time. Like, you don't need any special tools or anything. If you do want a tool, and you and I have done this in depth and gone and talked a lot about this over many years, is the StrengthsFinder assessment as a way to provide a language to describe what an individual is naturally talented to do. So whether, highly recommend every leader take it, and then go through it with your team as well. And I've got specific agenda of workshops and things to run with that I have inside the B2B Leaders Academy, questions, ways to facilitate this as a team, way to bring it together as a team. But it really is the language to describe what you're naturally talented to do. And when somebody asks, what are you really good at? What do you like to do? The answer is, I don't really know most of the time, or I kind of like to work with people. And it's usually very general. I spoke this way until I took it many years ago. And now I have a crystal clear, precise way that I've built my entire business and life around, is maximizing those things which I'm naturally talented to do. And you have as well.
Yep. I love that call. As you were sharing that, Nils, the word that came to mind was like clarity. Doing the StrengthsFinder exercise helped give me clarity around, well, I know that I'm really good at accomplishing things, achieving things. But what I realized after doing that is executor, like actually executing, is one of my core power. It's one of my superpowers. And it speaks to a lot of the success that I've had in the past. It's all been related to strong execution. But I could never really articulate that before. I didn't know how to share that in a very concise way. So doing that exercise was helpful. And doing it with your team is massively helpful because you can understand all of our strengths also have a weakness side of it. So how does my executor potentially negatively impact others if I'm not keeping it in mind? And it just helps in so many ways in understanding your colleagues. How do we more effectively work together? So highly recommend that exercise, not just for yourself, but for teams as well.
And clarity shall set you free.
Yes,
one of my all-time favorite sayings, because every time it comes up, it just does. All right, cool. Well, we're going to wrap up here, but we've just shared 7 ideas on how to inspire your team. We talked about empowering your employees, taking the long-term view, but balancing it with the immediate needs. We talked about fostering a culture of innovation, building a team identity, fostering a collaborative environment, and recognizing that everybody's favorite radio station is WIIFM, what's in it for me, and promoting a continuous growth and learning. ultimately through the use of strengths and observing what you and your team are naturally talented to do. Sara, it's been an absolute pleasure spending some time with you. Again, thank you for coming back on the podcast and sharing your insights and expertise with us. I can't wait to have you back again in the future.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Nils. It has been a pleasure, and thank you for sharing more of your wisdom with me as well.
Take care.
You too.